Hello, hi. Thank you guys for joining us on our VAC podcast. This is Dianne from the Safeguarding Project, and today I'm joined by Suzie, Yassin and Jane Murphy to talk to us a little bit about the new out-of-school settings guidance that's come out from the government, and to tell us a little bit more about it and how it can support you with your work, and how it can continue, how you guys can continue to deliver the great services that you deliver outside of mainstream education. So if I'd like to hand over to you, Suzie and Jane, to introduce yourself first.
Hi, I'm Suzie Yassin. I'm the Supplementary Education Officer here at Camden, and I'm also the Quality Assurance Manager at the National Resource Centre for Supplementary Education, NRCSE, so supporting supplementary schools and out-of-school settings across London.
Fantastic, thank you, Suzie.
And I'm Jane Murphy, and I work for Camden Learning. And I've got experience with safeguarding in mainstream settings, but also anywhere where children are, so out of school settings as well, and supporting organisations with that.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully we're going to get lots of fantastic information. But before we go on, I really would like to start by, if we could, defining for people who are listening, what do we mean when we say out of school settings? That term sort of seems to be used a lot, but I was wondering if you can explain for our listeners what that term means and all the things that that could potentially entail.
Oh,
yeah, Jane, if you could, thank you.
Okay, I'll go, and I'm just going to read something that we'll talk about later, but it comes from the DFE, and it says, an out of school setting can mean many things, from places like community and youth centres, sports clubs, places of worship, to individuals offering tuition in their own home, or to providing coaching at a one-to-one session on a playing field or a local park. And also, importantly, it says fees may or may not be charged. So I think basically from that, we're talking about anywhere where children are and they're receiving like guidance or lessons or support that's not a mainstream school or regulated by Ofsted.
Okay, that's actually really helpful to have that read out, because it's quite clear. So in terms of what's going on in Camden and the sort of Camden landscape, I was wondering, Suzie, could you tell me a little bit about what the out of school setting situation sort of looks like in Camden? I mean, I know previously in this role, my predecessor, Ashikin Dawale, she was doing a mapping project before I joined in 2018 to try and find out where all our supplementary schools were. But I was wondering if you can tell me a little bit about what that means for us in Camden at the moment.
Sure. So in Camden, like many boroughs, there's a really there's a sizable number of out-of-school settings, quite varied, from supplementary schools that offer language classes and cultural classes as well as tuition centres, madrasas, church schools, sports clubs, after school settings. It's quite varied in Camden, and some of them have been operating for many years and have a good relationship with Camden communities. They really offer a lot of opportunities for young people, and they've been working with organisations such as the NRCSE, as well as Voluntary Action Camden. They've got a good relationship with Camden Council and Camden Learning. So it's quite a dynamic scene and quite dynamic sector in Camden.
And where would they have usually been supported? Would they have been supported through VAC and supported through these channels?
Yeah, so for example, in Camden, there is a supplementary schools forum that many of these settings are part of. They also have, they've been supported by funding that's come from Young Camden Foundation, for example, or they are regular subscribers and members to NRCSE and VAC, Voluntary Action Camden. So they receive the newsletter, they come to sessions, they attend training. and these organizations are and groups are quite active. A lot of them are probably listening to us at the moment, but you know, and this is the same across London. So a lot of activity happens on weekends and after school. They also operate from mainstream schools as well as community centres, and they are quite active, supporting quite a large number of children across the borough.
Fantastic. So there's a lot of parents, children accessing these services outside of the mainstream system. So thank you. Thanks for explaining all that. And that actually moves us nicely onto the guidance, actually, because I know that, as you say, these schools and these tuition centres have been operating in Camden for a long time and doing lots of really great work. But now the government has given us this guidance to assist them. And I was just thinking in terms of not just what that document is about, but how, as a parent or somebody who's running a centre, how it can help them with their work and their service delivery. I was wondering, Jane, could you tell us a little bit about that at all?
I'll tell you a little bit more about the guidance, and then come on to what it looks like for being a parent. So the guidance is actually really exciting. The DFE, you know, it acknowledged that this sector existed, but hadn't really thought about how they could support this sector. And then a few years ago, they started consulting with the sector on, you know, what support might look like. And it has taken a long time, partly because, like we've been talking about, it is such a complicated and diverse sector, from a really, you know, well-managed, massive school that might take place in a school building to one-to-one tuition in somebody's house, or even to pay. We've talked about it, but it's a massive sector. So it's taken them a very long time to work in consultation and come up with this, you know, really comprehensive guidance. And the guidance is good as well, because it talks about statutory obligations, you know, things that legally you have to do if you are in charge of children, like you have a duty of care, and you have a duty to hold your supplementary school in a safe place, like fire regulations. And then there's good practice and things that, you know, you would want to do to keep children safe. So basically what the guidance does is it recognises that supplementary schools and out of school settings are really, really valuable in terms of supporting young people's well-being and in all the activities that they do, and really, really beneficial and highly respected in all the people who work in those settings, particularly, you know, if they're doing it without getting paid, doing it as a volunteer. And it goes through 4, you know, quite clear sections. So there's a health and safety section, there's one on child protection and safeguarding, then there's one that talks about staff and volunteers and their suitability and how you might do checks or make sure they're trained, etc., etc. And then there's one on governance, like the management of the supplementary school, from, you know, a small one to a fairly larger one, how you make sure that's robust and helps you to keep your setting going as much as anything, in terms of getting funding for it, but also in terms of making sure it's as safe as possible.
Fantastic.
I've talked quite a lot, but you then asked a question about a parent. Do you want to just say that again?
I mean, because I know a lot of your supplementary school managers or people who are running supplementary schools, a lot of them have come on, a few of them have come on my safeguarding courses to make sure that, you know, they're doing things right in that respect. And similarly, I've had parents come on and find out about the safeguarding, to find out actually what they should be looking for when they're looking for a supplementary school or tuition centre for their child. And I was just wondering, if we could talk a little bit about that in terms of, because I know there's a lot of restrictions at the moment in terms of COVID and in terms of how this pandemic is with us, and we have to think about still delivering and still running services. So I wanted to know a little bit about, if I was a parent, what are the restrictions? What does it look like at the moment in Camden, our supplementary school service delivery? Suzie or Jane, whichever could answer that.
shall I just answer the bit about the parents, and then we'll come on to the restrictions at the moment. So,
Yeah.
The guidance is actually again really good, because it's got a section that's specifically for parents. And I think lots of authorities anyway had thought quite a lot about this. Like Camden has got their own, questions you could ask if you're a parent. But it has, a few page document which just goes through, the kind of questions that a parent might want to ask to make sure that the supplementary school is taking note of the new guidance and operating safely. I mean, they may have been operating safely even before the guidance came out, but it's asking questions like, a parent could ask, what training have staff had, or do you have a complaints policy, or who's in charge of first aid? So just questions like that. And then underneath the questions, it says things like what a good answer might be, the kind of thing you might expect to hear if this is a well-run, safe supplementary school, and also the things that might cause a red flag, might cause you to worry about the safe operating of this school.
Fantastic. That's really useful, actually, because I get a lot of queries about that. And in terms of the restrictions currently, Suzie, can you possibly shed some light on that?
Yeah, sure. So as we all know, England is under national restrictions that started from the 5th of November. And the main purpose is for it to reduce the spread of the virus, with the main message being stay at home, except for specific purposes. And one of those specific purposes is for education and childcare. That's why schools are open and universities are open, etc. But when it comes to out of school activities and out of school settings, there is an exception for those who operate as a respite for parents, or their primary purpose is for home educating parents that use them to support the full-time education of their children, or if they are, youth services providing support for vulnerable children. So the remainder of out of school settings should remain closed during this time, but can operate remotely. And there's some information that we have posted around remote learning on the NRCSC website that I encourage your listeners to go to. Yeah. There's also training available. So a lot of people are wanting a very simple, should we stay open, can we stay open or closed? But it's understanding that guidance around what is the purpose of that out of school activity. If it is to provide respite, if it is a registered childcare, or it's supporting home education, yes. If it's not, then it should be closed, but may offer remote learning and teaching. But it is a confusing time. It is a difficult time for out of school settings. So I do encourage you to get in touch and to make sure that you're able to kind of go through the kind of get a better understanding of what that means, not just in the short term, but also the long term. I think that it's in Camden, I know through our forums, we discuss how, we're discussing how COVID has had an impact on these groups. So it's important to be in touch and be part of these forums so you can listen to the discussions and get that support, because I think things are not going to go back to normal. They are changing. So it's about preparing and supporting organizations to remain offering the great services and the great opportunities they do provide for young people, but in a capacity that works.
That's brilliant, actually. And what I think I'll do, Suzie, if you can give me all the contact details, that would be helpful for our listeners. Sure. So maybe your contact details and where they can access the forum and get your newsletter, because you've got a great newsletter. And I know you're also available on the Camden Safeguarding Partnership website, aren't you, as well? So we'll post under this podcast. We'll make sure that we put all of those details on there for you, so you've got access to all that support and information. I just wanted to say quickly, Suzie, if anybody was interested in getting the NRCSC quality mark, how do they go about that? Do they just contact you directly? They think that they're up to going through that?
Sure. So just for those who don't know what the quality mark is, the quality mark is a quality assurance framework, is a kite mark for designed specifically for supplementary schools. And it's a process, a developmental process that allows schools to put together a portfolio and a management file with all their policies and procedures that is then recognized by educational experts, and you get a kite mark at the end. The great thing about the NRCSC quality mark is that a lot of funders are now looking for that as a measure of quality assurance. And so if there's anyone listening who's interested to learn more, there's a quiz on the NRCSC website that that you can go through, and it shows you where you are in terms of your readiness to go for the quality mark, and all the contacts are there so that you can access the team at NRCSC.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Suzie. And I know I do get a lot of queries from supplementary schools for safeguarding training, but not only that, but for funding as well. And I was just wondering if there was any funding opportunities available currently, or that you knew about that could help our listeners.
Yes, so the in Camden, the Young Camden Foundation has just released the Supplementary Schools Network Fund. This is the second year it's been running. So last year there were around 9 schools that were funded, and so there's information around that on the Young Camden Foundation website. I think, again, we'll provide that detail. And that funding is open to supplementary schools or after school settings that operate in Camden. But there is similar funding that happens across London as well. And you can contact your Young People's Foundations if you have one in the borough. And that's where details of all the funding is available. This is why it's really important that if you do run an out-of-school activity, that you are connected to your local support group. So in Camden, it's Voluntary Action Camden, it's the National Resource Centre for Supplementary Education, it's Camden Learning, who do provide support and regular newsletters and regular updates. So it's important that you're part of that network so you can access information on funding, on support, on network meetings, on guidance around policy. So that's one of the most important things that we should highlight today.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. I mean, I think that was really useful. What we're going to do, as we said, we're going to put all of those links on our underneath the podcast and on the VAC website. Our newsletter comes out every Friday, and it's going to have all of that information on there. If you ladies have any other things that you think might be useful, you can send them on to me, and I can post those as well. And just to say that Suzie and Jane's details will be available. If you have any questions, you can always email me in the usual way, and I can forward that on to Jane and Suzie. But just lastly to say thank you so much for your time. And if there are any questions, we can support you with